Welcome back, my spooky followers. So, if you're new, welcome to Spooky Little Things, and thank you for joining. If you're one of my spooky little followers, welcome back, and we're going to be doing something what I've been wanting to do, which is I have this book here that I've got. I don't own any of the rights to these stories, but I figured it'd be fun to do a read spooky story thing like I've been saying. So I have this big giant book. Again, these stories are not mine. I'm just reading. I will name who the author of the story is. This little little thing of this big book just has multiple different little stories. It is done by Stefan something or other. It's like great spiritual stories. And the first one here I have is Accessory Before the Fact is the name, and it was done by Algernon Blackwood. And this is a story that happened to this person, and so I do not take any credit for these stories. These stories are not my own, but I figured it'd be fun to read a book together. And this just happens to have multiple different little stories from people. So we'll start with this one and see how this goes. And again, these are supernatural stories, so anything to do with ghosts, aliens, God knows what it could be. So let's get to reading. I've got some water here, some spooky music that I am not responsible for either in the playing in the background. So yeah, let's see how this goes. Okay. Accessory Before the Fact. At the moorland crossroads, Martin stood examining the signpost for several minutes in some bewilderment. The names on the forearms were not what he expected. Distance were not given, and his map, he concluded, was impotence. Must be hopeless, out of date. Spreading it against the post, he stopped to study it more closely. The wind blew, the corners flapping against his face. The small print was almost indecipherable. In the fading light, it appeared, however, as well as he could make out, the 2 miles back he must have taken the wrong turn. Wrong turning is what it says. He remembered that turning. The path had looked inviting. He had hesitated a moment, then followed it, caught by the usual lure of walkers that it might prove a shortcut. The shortcut sneered, as old as human nature. For some minute he studied the signpost and map alternately. Dusk was falling, and his knapsack had grown heavy. He could not make the 2 guides tally. However, and a feeling of uncertainty crept over his mind. He felt oddly baffled, frustrated. His thought grew thick. Decision was most difficult. I'm muddled. He thought, I must be tired. As the length he chose, the most likely harm. Sooner or later it will bring me to an inn. Though not the one I intended, he accepted his walker's luck. It started briskly. The arm read over Litacy Hill in small, fine letters, and dance shifted every time he looked at them. but the name was not discoverable on the map. It was, however, interesting, like the shortcut. A similar impulse sign again directed his choice. One, only this time it seemed more instant, almost urgent. And he became aware, then, of the exceeding loneliness of the country about him. The road for 100 yards went straight, then curved, like a white river running into space. The deep blue-green of heather lined the banks, spreading upwards through the twilight, and occasionally small pines stood solitary here and there, all unexplained. The curious adjective, having made its appearance, haunted him. So many things that afternoon was similarly unexplained. The shortcut, the darkened map, the names on the signpost, his own erratic impulses, and the growing strange confusion that crept upon his spirit. The entire countryside needed explanation, though perhaps interpretation was truer word. Those little lonely trees that had made him see it. Why had he lost his way so easily? What did he suffer? Vague impressions to influence his direction. Why was he here? Exactly here. And why did he go now? Over Latacey Hill. Then, by a green field, that shone like a thought of daylight, aimed the darkness of the moor. He saw a figure laying in the grass. It was a blot upon the landscape, a mere huddled patch of dirty rags, yet with a certain horrid picturesqueness too, in his mind. Though his German was of the schoolroom order, at once picked out the German equivalents as against the English. Lump and lumpen flashed across his brain most oddly. They seemed in the moment right. Neither and so expressive, and so expressive, almost like onomatopoeic words, if that were possible of sight. Neither rags nor rascals would have fitted what he saw. That quaint description was in German. Here was a clue tossed up by the part of him that did not reason, but it seemed he missed it. And the next minute the trump rose to a sitting posture and asked the time of evening. In German he asked it, and Martin, answering without a second's hesitation, gave it, also in German. Habla si bien. 6:30. The instinctive guess was accurate. A glance at his watch when he looked a moment later proved it. He heard the man say with the covert insolence of tramps, "Tea, thank you, much obliged." For Martin had not shown his watch. Another institution subconsciously obeyed? He quickened his pace along that lonely road, a curious jumble of thoughts and feelings surging through him. He had somehow known the question could come, and come in German. Yet it flustered and dismayed him. Another thing had also flustered and dismayed him. He had experienced it in the same queer fashion. It was right, for when the ragged brown thing rose to ask a question, a part of it remained laying on the grass. Another brown, dirty thing. There were two trunks. And he saw both faces clearly, behind the untidied beards and below the old slouch hats. He caught the look of unpleasant, clever faces that watched him closely while he passed. The eyes followed him. For a second he looked straight into those eyes, so that he could not fail to know them. And he understood, quite horridly. The men were not really tramps at all. They were disguised. How covertly they watched me, was his thought, and he hurried along the darkening road, aware in dead earnest now of the loneliness and desolation of the moorland all about him. Uneasy and distressed, he increased his pace. Midway in thinking, what an uneasily clanking noise his nail boots made upon the hard white road, there came upon him with a rush together the company of these things that haunted him as unexplained. They brought a single definite message, that is, all business was not really meant for him at all, and hence his confusion and bewilderment. Then he had intruded into someone else's scenery, and was trespassing upon another's map of life. By some wrong inner turning he imploded his person into a group of foreign forces, which operated in the little word of someone else. Unwillingly, somewhere, he had crossed the threshold and now was fairly in, a trespasser, an eavesdropper, a peeping Tom. He was listening, peeping, overbearing things he had no right to know, because they were intended for another. Like a ship at sea, he was intercepting wireless messages he could not properly interpret, because his receiver was not accurately tuned to their reception. And more, these messages were warnings. Then fear dropped upon him like the night. He was caught in a net of delicate, deep forces he could not manage. Knowing neither their origin nor purpose, he had walked into some huge psychic trap, elaborately planned and baited, yet calculated for another than himself. Something had lured him in, something in the landscape, the time of day, his mood, owing to some undiscovered weakness in himself. He had been easily caught. His fear slipped easily into terror. What happened next happened with such speed and concentration that it all seemed crammed into a moment. With such speed and concentration that it all seemed crammed into a moment. At once it heaped into it happened. It was quite inevitable. Down the white road to meet him a man came swaying from side to side, and drunkenness quite obviously fade. A tramp. And while Martin made room for him to pass, the lurch charged in a second to attack, and the fellow was upon him. The blow was sudden and terrific. Yet while it fell, Martin was aware that behind him rushed a second man, who caught his legs from under him and bore him with a thud and crashed to the ground. Blows rained then. He saw a gleam of something, shining. A suddenly deadly nausea plagued him into utter weakness where resistance was impossible. Something of fire entered his throat, and from his mouth poured a thick, sweet thing that choked him. The world sank far away into darkness. Yet through all the horror and confusion ran the trail of two clear thoughts. He realized that the first tramp had sneaked at a fast double through the heather and so came down to meet him, and that something heavy was torn from fastenings that clipped it tight and closed beneath his clothes against his body. Abruptly, then the darkness lifted, passed utterly away. He found himself peering into the map against the signpost. The wind was flapping the corners against his cheek, and he was poring over names, and now he saw quite clear. Upon the arms of the signpost were those he had expected to find, and the map recorded them quite faithfully. It was all accurate again, and it should be. He read the name of the village he had meant to make. It was plenty visible in the dark. 2 miles the distance gave. Bewildered, shaken, unable to think of anything, he studied the map into his pocket. He stuffed it into his pocket, unfolded, and hurried forward like a man who was just wakened from an awful dream that had compressed into a single second all the detailed misery of some prolonged, oppressive nightmare. He broke into a steady trot that soon became a run. The perception poured from him. His legs felt weak and his breath was difficult to manage. He was only conscious of the overpowering desire to get away as fast as possible from the signpost, at the crossroads where the dreadful vision had flashed upon him. For Martin, accountant on a holiday, he had never dreamed of any world of psychic possibilities. That entering thing was torture. It was worse than a cooked balance of the books that some conspiring of clerks and directors proved to his innocent door. He raced as though the countryside ran crying at his heels. And always still run with him the incredible conviction that none of this was really meant for himself at all. He had overheard the secrets of another. He had taken the warning for another into himself, and so altered his direction. He had thereby prevented his right delivery. It all shook him beyond words. It dislocated the machinery of just an accurate soul. The warning was intended for another who could not, would not, now receive it. The physical exertion, however, brought at length a more comfortable reaction, and some measure of composure. With the lights in sight, he slowed down and entered the village at a reasonable pace. The inn was reached, a bedroom inspected and engaged, and supper ordered with the solid comfort of a large bath, to satisfy an unholy thirst and complete the restoration of balance. The unusual sensation largely passed away, and the odd feeling that anything in his simple, wholesome world required explanation was no longer present. Still, with a vague uneasiness about him, though actual fear quite gone, he went into the bar to smoke an after-supper pipe and chat with the natives, as his pleasure was upon a holiday, and so saw two men leaning upon the counter at the far end with their backs towards him. He saw their faces instantly in the glass, and the pipe nearly slipped from between his teeth. Clean-shaven, sleek, clever faces, and he caught a word or two as they talked over their drinks. German words. Well dressed they were, both men, with nothing about them calling for particular attention. They might have been two tourists holidaying, making life like himself in tweeds and walking boots, and they presently paid for their drinks and went out. He never saw them face to face at all, but the sweat broke out afresh all over him. A feverish rush of heat and ice together ran about his body, beyond questions. He recognized the two tramps, this time not disguised. Not yet disguised. He remained in the center, in the corner, without moving, puffing violently at an extinguished pipe, gripping helplessly by the return of that first vile terror. It came again to him with an absolute clarity of certainty that it was not with himself they had to do, these men, and further that he had no right in the world to interfere. They had to do. These men, and further what he had no right in the world to interfere. He had no locus standing at all. It would be immoral. Even if the opportunity came, and the opportunity he felt would come. He had been an eavesdropper and had come upon private information of a secret kind that had no right to make use of. Even that good might come, even to save life. He sat in his corner, terrified and silent, waiting for the long thing that should happen next. But the night came without explanation. Nothing happened. He slept soundly. There was no other guest at the inn but an elderly man, apparently a tourist like himself. He wore gold-rimmed glasses, and in the morning Martin overheard him asking the landlord what direction should take for Lettucey Hill. His teeth began to chatter, and a weakness came into his knees. You turn to the left at the crossroads, Martin broke in before the landlord could reply. You'll see the signpost about 2 miles from here, and after that it's a matter of 4 miles more. How in the world did he know? Flashed horribly through him. I'm going that way myself, he was saying next. I'll go with you for a bit, if you don't mind. The words came out impulsively and ill-considered. Of their own accord they came. For his own direction was exactly opposite. He did not want the man to go alone. The stranger, however, easily evaded his offer of companionship. He thanked him with the remark that was starting later in the day. They were standing all three beside the horse trough in front of the inn, when at that very moment a trap, slouching along the road, looked up and asked the time of day, and it was the man with the gold-rimmed glasses who told him. Thank you, much obliged, the tramp replied, passing on his slow, slouching gait, while the landlord, a talkative fellow, proceeded to remark upon the number of he remarked upon the number of Germans that lived in England and were ready to swell the Tunic invasion, which he, for the part of, deemed imminent. But Martin heard it not. Before he had gone on a mile upon his way, he went into the woods to fight his conscience all alone. His feebleness, his cowardice, were surely criminal. Real anguish tortured him. A dozen times he decided to go back upon his steps, and a dozen times the singular authority that whispered he had no right to interfered, preventing him. How could he act upon knowledge gained by eavesdropping? He interfered in the private business of another's hidden life merely because he overheard. As at the telephone its secret dangers, some inner confusion prevented straight thinking altogether. The stranger would merely think him mad. He had no fact to go upon. He smothered 100 impulses and finally went on his way with a shaking, terrible heart. The last 2 days of his holiday. The last 2 days of his holidays were ruined by doubts and questions and alarms, all justified later when he read of the murder of a tourist upon Littlesea Hill. The man wore gold-rimmed glasses and carried in a belt about his person a large sum of money. His throat was cut, and the police were hard upon the trail of a mysterious pair of tramps, said to be Germans. That, my dear friends, is the first story of the little book. These stories are not very long. They're kind of short, but I only want to do one here and there because it can be. Some of them are kind of long, but I think it'd be fun just to keep going and reading eventually. Excuse me, like I haven't done much today, but yeah, I keep going. I know my reading is not the best, but I have fun. I enjoy reading. It is one of my favorite things to do. And I hope you guys will enjoy the little bit that I do on reading these books, because I think this will be pretty fun. On the real short ones, I'll probably do 2, depending. But I figured if anything, we'll just do one a video, depending on how long the videos are. Because sometimes reading in your head and reading out loud, it takes 2 different length time periods. But next one we'll do is a do, and we'll see how that story pans out. That last one was kind of interesting and a little tough to read just for the way it's written, but nonetheless, it was a good story. I actually enjoyed that one. And next time we'll do another. Yeah. And so thank you guys. If you enjoyed this video, let me know. Do thumbs up. Subscribe if you like. I do plan on doing more of these types of videos. I think it'll be fun. And don't forget to go look at my shop, my merch store. Is Spooky Pooky Designs. Again, I'll leave the link to go to the store in the description. I'll also put the name of the book, the name of the story I read, and the person it happened to. But yeah, ooh, let's see. Let's get the camera to refocus. Oh, that's a little better. It's a little blurry. But yeah, go like, hit the like button, subscribe, and keep checking back for more videos. And like I said, I'm trying to keep up with it, trying to post more. And right now I've got a little bit of time to myself, so maybe I'll make a couple of videos while I'm here, and we'll get this fun stuff going. And I hope you guys come back, and thank you for shaking the table. Thank you for joining me on this little reading adventure, and I can't wait to see you guys again. Bye.